Okay, then we will move to item B, parent-student handbook revisions at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. We'll start out with Mrs. Clark. You're here for the elementary, so why don't we open up? I think you'll see what I asked the principals to do is just to give us a summary of changes. We've been very busy with lots of different issues this summer, and I'm not sure that all the handbooks are actually created, but we certainly can go online, look at last year's, and then compare that summary sheet. I think they've got page numbers and everything on there. But okay,
for the elementary handbook, the biggest thing is it was like 58 pages, and we just cut it down to 31. We didn't take anything out. We just condensed it and put it into maybe more user-friendly terms as far as sorting them by academics or general information or attendance. I'd give you this. This has not been proofread yet, but I'd give you it. We didn't take anything out. All the required board policies, annual notices are in there. They're all updated and accurate. The only thing we have to wait for is you setting the food service prices today. And the only thing we actually added was a paragraph on response to intervention. So.
Thank you. Okay. Why don't we hang on to it, and then if they'd like to look at the big draft. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Clark. And Mrs. Lukey is here for the high school to review that.
So you have the stuff for this week?
Yes.
The high school revisions are the calendar, the new staff we haven't been able to revise yet. So we're working on that. We changed our public display of affection clause to match what the middle school says, so we're consistent with that. We removed the requirements for 2011 graduation as they're not relevant anymore. Jesse looked through the food service description and updated that for us. So that was updated. We did update the rule on hats for student use. They're able to wear them to and from their lockers and at lunchtime, and then they will need to keep them in their lockers during the rest of the school day, which we hadn't specified, so they would carry them around and they'd stick them on their heads all the time. So we're hoping that'll cut down on that. Let's see, removal of references to the school's in-school suspension. We don't have an in-school suspension, so we took those out. And then just updated the hours for the detentions and raised the parking permit fee from $20 to $25. And that's it.
That's it, thank you. And then Mr. Buss took some vacation time, so he is just coming back tonight from Chicago. Thought maybe he could make it, but the summary is attached. They have done some wording on public displays of affection, and as Mrs. Lukey said, this will be in the high school handbook as well. So acknowledging that there may be feelings of affection, but that students should not be hugging and kissing. Again, some revision to electronic devices. Middle school students are going to be able to use those at lunch time. Not their cell phones, but those MP3 players and iPods. That type of thing. Cell phones, a slight revision that they use the devices before they enter the building, after the final bell rings at 3:16. And they need to be in their locker, turned off or put on silent, and that is consistent with policy. The references to the late bus were removed. The middle school is working on a new late work policy, and they've reached consensus with staff in regard to that. I know they're going to continue to work on this, but you can read through that students may receive up to a 10% reduction in their score on any late assignment. And then they're also going to be allowing water bottles in class throughout the school year. section that they added on taking courses for high school credit, and then some clarification on the after-school WIN program, and then for exercise and sports science, how students can be earning their points when they are absent. So. Along with that, of course, would be any of the cosmetic changes with calendar, teaching, and all of those things.
I'm not sure if we actually approve these revisions. I think we typically do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'll make a motion to approve the parent-student handbook revisions as presented for the elementary, middle school, and high school.
Second.
okay, we have a motion and a second then to approve those revisions to the to the elementary, middle school, and high school handbooks. Any further discussion?
I would just like to address the middle school revisions. The only issue I have is on the electronic devices. I don't know if this came up in discussion before and what went behind the decision, but I guess I would not be in favor of changing it to allow the students to be gaming in school. I mean, I'm confident that kids are doing a lot of gaming outside of school. I don't know why we're facilitating more of that in school. And as I understand it, if they are going to be using these iPods or MP3s, it would probably only serve to discourage them from going outside, which is what many of the kids do that don't do those things, or even at the expense of eating lunch. I'm not saying this is a huge issue, but I don't know why as a school we're facilitating more electronic games when we are in a constant struggle to fight for the attention of our children's concentration when they are just overwhelmed by television, electronic devices. I don't think it's the place of the school to facilitate more of that. I don't know if there's some reasoning that went behind it that I don't know about, but I would be personally against that change.
Mrs. Clark, I don't know, were you involved in any of the discussions?
The only I can add to the conversation was that we were, mainly kids asked us to listen, they can listen to their music. And when we've used that in the past for an incentive, we don't let them share headphones because I don't want my child listening to what your child listens to until I know what it is. So we use it as an individual. If you bring it and you listen to your music, that's okay. We do have a few kids that do play the gaming, but it's not, I mean, you couldn't find 10 kids now who are doing it out of 200 at lunch. Most of our middle school kids still want to play outside. But there are a few that, I mean, they use it to relax sometimes.
Is your question strictly geared towards the MP3 type of devices, or are you talking about phones in general too here? Or?
No, they're separately addressed in the cell phones, and that sounds reasonable. They're saying no cell phones except right before they enter the buildings and after the final bell rings. I think that's a very good accommodation of the cell phones. It's very handy for, as all the parents know, to have your kids be able to phone you to come pick you up. I'm addressing any of the electronic devices in that paragraph which speaks to being able to use them at lunch. Perhaps it's not a lot of kids. I don't know that we need to make an exception for 10 or 15. While they're at school, it just seems to me we should be creating an environment where they're connecting to other students, they're engaged in the whole school environment. And even if it's not the electronic games, if it's the music, we've all seen what those kids do when they put their buds in. They are tuned out. They're looking at the ground. They're not looking at what's going on around them. And I am very confident they are getting as much of that as they need outside of school. I just don't know why we need to facilitate that inside school, which we work so hard to create an environment of learning and society. I think it's counterproductive. And I would ask, do we even know what kind of games they're using? For all we know, they could be playing Grand Theft Auto. I mean, I'm getting into exaggeration now. I'm overstating a little bit, but unless there is a better argument that not a lot of kids are doing it, I say we just draw a hard line and say we're not going to go that direction.
John, I think, too, if I'm not mistaken, that cell phones are at the high school. Kids are able to use them at lunch now.
Yeah.
Okay, I think part of it is, too, the distinction between MP3 player or a, Apple iPod versus a telephone. They're almost indistinguishable now. And I'm not justifying either way, but those same applications that those kids are playing on the MP3s, whether it be the MP3 player itself or even the iPod with the different games on there, you're going to have those kids are going to have those same opportunities on the phone, and then it becomes a matter of policing. And I think that was why the initial decision was made to bring those, to allow the students to use those phones. That was a big step in itself, and I don't know, you probably weren't here for the discussion, but the discussion to allow the kids to even use the telephones was based on where do we want, I think for the most part, if I'm not mistaken from some of the conversations, was based on what do we want our administrators doing, chasing cell phones down during lunch and recesses, or trying to concentrate on educational leadership and student achievement. So I think that was one piece. Now I'm not sure I was there for the discussions for the MP3s and the iPods, but we're getting to the point where these telephones, and I happen to own one, the smartphone, that has everything that you could possibly imagine on it. And I gotta imagine that there are a number of students that are running around with the smartphones where there's no way you're ever going to be able to keep up with it. And it does come down to decision. Do you want your administrators policing cell phones, or do you want to, and I certainly understand where you're coming, I'm just giving you a little background. I think that's what eventually, why we decided to allow the students to allow them to use them during that lunch period.
And that's specific to the high school.
Yes.
And I would agree with, from the time that I spent at the middle school, I agree with the policing aspect of it as well. If there's a child who can sit and play their video game, and that's going to prevent them from getting into a fight with someone because they're not a student that likes to be actively involved with other people, I'd rather have them sitting there doing that. The other issue is it's their lunch hour. They have 34 minutes. And to be policing their behavior during a time that should be their free time, especially as kids are getting into middle school, we have to be able to give them some degree of, I believe, freedoms and opportunity to make some judgments about what they're going to do. And it's not that hundreds of kids are sitting in the cafeteria playing those games, but for those that find that to be what they enjoy to do for their comfort for 30 minutes, I'm not sure it's worth an administrator's time to be fighting that. And it becomes an issue. And it's not one the parents want to support administrators on, to be perfectly honest, because they also take the argument it's their free time. Why can't they play this?
But we set rules all the time for kids. That's our job. And we talk and talk and talk about how much we need to get them to read. If they don't want to go outside, if they're not comfortable with interacting with other children, read a book. There's a great library there.
There are many kids that do that as well. Mm-hmm. So what if, a nook?
A nook.
Can they bring a nook?
I mean, if there's a problem with kids being afraid to go out with other children, that's an issue that should be addressed. I don't see giving kids electronic games as the answer to that solution. It's their free time, they can relax.
And I don't think kids are afraid. I'm just saying there are kids who that's their comfort level. That's what they would prefer to do. And, you know, especially with some of our students that have some special needs diagnosis. I don't think there's any question that that is their comfort area.
John, it's very simple to handle this, just like earlier we opened the campus. That campus in a heartbeat could be closed. So the same thing with these iPods or machines that you're talking about. If it gets to be a problem, isn't it true, administrators, that it could be taken away from them as soon as advantageous to them to have it? Couldn't it be taken away if it gets to be a problem?
And if I could just add, during the lunch periods, their teachers do supervision and administration is down there 95% of the time. Very rarely we walk by a student and I say, oh, what are you doing? What are you know, listening to? Do some things and maybe get biased once in a while. I'm sure they do, but we do pay attention to those kids regularly.
I mean, what are we talking about? A half hour or so? As it's been mentioned, it's their free time, so that may expound on their afternoon activities because they've had a chance to do this. I don't know, if it gets to be a problem, you just take it away. And the people that are taking care of open campus, we've said that many times, if you don't adhere to it, bang, it's gone. Very simple.
I'd have to look too, John. I mean, we do have a policy on that. And it basically addressed all electronic devices, you know, and you could hardly, it's like the world is exploding with those, you know, so we wanted to be as inclusive as we could. And it was mostly addressed at the high school. But the middle school was less so. And, you know, I agree. For my personal choice, that's not what I would choose for my child to do. And mine didn't, much to their chagrin. But again, I understand the fact. Unfortunately, we're an all-encompassing school for differing types of children, and I guess that's what our thinking was. Is that when we did review this policy, that was a big deal, was the policing, and it was more of an issue at the high school at the time, as I remember it. I don't think it hardly got brought up concerning the middle school, so I was surprised to see this here too.
Yeah, I don't see the policing as being an issue. I mean, as I would propose it, if there's no electronics, there's nothing to police, right? I mean, you don't have to distinguish between
That's when you start policing.
What's that?
That's when you start policing. Because if the policy is they can't be there, then when a child has one out, now you're saying you can't use that, and that's when confrontation, so that's when the policing becomes the issue.
A side issue on this is that we know, and we have talked about, in the future we will be building all these personal electronic things into the classrooms down the future, and because that's the way the kids nowadays learn. Now, this is me talking, who is totally, I don't have or ever touched an iPod or an MP3 player or even a Game Boy. I don't know any of that stuff. But I do know the future for our kids is electronic gizmos that are coming out, and that's how they're going to learn. And that's how they communicate now. And we have talked here as a board about in the future, those things are going to have to be used as part of the learning process in the classrooms. So I see this as a beginning of electronic devices in the schools. And yes, we have them not in the classrooms right now, and we have rules about where they can be and where they can't be, but it's the beginning stages of what we know we're going to have in the future.
And I have to bring up too, and I'm not arguing either way, I'm just trying to throw different things out there. If you have a smartphone you have an MP3 player on it, and you have the capability to game on that, you have the capability to surf the internet, you have the capability to use it as a Kindle and read on it. How would you distinguish between using a smartphone in the context of gaming versus a smartphone? I mean, it just...
We don't allow cell phones at the middle school at all, even if they say, we want to play.
I understand that, but we do at the high school, so inherently you got some issues here with this. You know, whether it's, is it the high school, is it the middle school, but maybe that's a little bit of ways away, but I know there's kids with smartphones already, and again, and I'm not saying one way or another, those are just things that were discussed.
It was, and the main issue, I think, when we discussed that was the policing of it. But we were more in the context of the high school, because you had, every kid walking around with a cell phone. As soon as class got out, or as soon as, when are they allowed to use this, when can they use it, and it became such an issue with
Well, kids won't give them to you.
Right, they wouldn't give it to you.
It becomes a physical confrontation to get the phone back,
and just
that
the
was
security
just
of the
phones,
phone. A lot of these are very expensive, and the parents' involvement in that extreme. I mean, it was everything. But it was mostly the policing aspect of it, and when not. But the high school is a different entity than the middle school.
I have to go back to something that you said. You wouldn't allow your kids because that was your choice as a parent. There are some parents that are obviously making the choice that it's okay for their kids, or it might be best for their kids. There's a whole different gamut there.
And I don't know if I should bring this up, but sometimes even on the school buses, kids are encouraged to bring those and use them on the buses to keep them occupied. Again, your idea of books is probably a far better option, but for kids that are on long bus rides, so they have these devices at school, it's their lunch period. I mean, I agree. It's not, my kid was out playing every lunch hour, and most kids are, but not all prefer that.
I understand. I've stated my position. We can certainly move on.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second then to approve the parent-student handbook revisions for the elementary, middle school, and high school. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.